victimizers beware. The racist and bigots' greatest nightmare. Social justice warriors. Get triggered.
It's the bias response team.
If you've been offended, your feelings must be defended. Go! The freedom of expression is a microaggression. Here comes Antifa Freddy. He's always ready to fight fascism with fascism.
Starbucks windows don't stand a chance.
Ethnic enhancer. He's a systematic racism finder. I have the power to see racism everywhere. Using the powers of screaming and shame, they win every debate by calling your names. They're heroes who think that they're victims. Social justice warriors. Get triggered.
All right, people of the internet, this is CancelCon. I'm Dave Rubin, alongside Dennis Prager, Adam Carolla, and Ben Shapiro. You might have heard of these people, possibly, maybe. What we're doing today is a live stream to talk about the No Safe Spaces movie, but more broadly, to talk about the thing that we're kind of all talking about all the time, and I don't mean just the four of us, I mean everybody really in the United States and all over the world. This crushing attack on free speech that you guys see not only in the college campus situation, but all over, in the corporate world, in academia, now in our political world, in the cultural sphere, everywhere. Everyone seems to be afraid to say what they think. And I found, I think, the last three guys who aren't afraid to say what they think. Gentlemen, say something controversial right up top. Dennis, what's the most controversial thing that one can say these days?
The most controversial thing, I'll tell you, America is a great country. I love America. Those are two of the most controversial things one can say. That's how Lincoln was a great man. In other words, any obvious moral statement regarding the U.S. is controversial. That's how bad things are.
Are you telling me that America was not founded on racism and bigotry and evil?
You know, I wonder, do I look at you or the camera? I love looking at you.
Look at me. Look at me for a second, for God's sakes.
So, I always wonder, of the many millions of slaves who came from Africa to the Western Hemisphere, right, North and South America, 3% came to the United States. About 340,000 versus, let's say, 12 million to Brazil. Are they undergoing the self-revolution in Brazil? Don't you wonder, why doesn't the left hate Brazil? We got 3% of the Africans who came here, plus in the last 30 years, 3 million Africans, 3 million blacks have come here, 1 million from the Caribbean, 2 million from Africa, because they know how good it is for a black to live here. So you have to live in a world of lies to accept this depiction of America.
Adam, he said that America's good. That was the short version. Can you possibly come up with something more controversial than that? I mean, come on, man.
Well, what no one really wants to hear is you'll either do well here or you won't do well here, and that'll be up to you. The playing field is fairly level, certainly level enough in almost 2021, and it'll never be completely level. It can't be completely level. People that are short have a slight disadvantage. People who are born to this type of family or missing a father in the home, for instance. But this is about as level a society as you can ever have, and thus it is up to you. Now, the people hate that story. Well, you know who hates that story? Children. Children hate that story. Like when you go, hey, if you're getting a bad grade, it's not because the teacher hates you, it's because you're not working hard enough. But now we're dealing with adult children everywhere you look. And this is all it is. It's basically taking adolescence and dragging it up into adulthood. And sadly, you know, I talk to people in their 70s who feel this way. My parents in their 80s, I think they feel this way. So unfortunately, everyone, if you live in this country and you live here during the present time, the onus is on you. If you're not having success, you got to go find a mirror.
So are you saying just because you want something, you can't necessarily have it? Because right now we are in your garage. You've got some pretty sweet cars around here. I mean, I assume that Dennis and Ben and I each can take a car.
Well, most of them have to go back to the prop house before we wrap tonight. Yes, all these cars are things that I've always wanted. I enjoy them now. I loved cars when I was young. I never had any money, so I could never afford to own a car that was nice. As a matter of fact, I work construction, so I was forced to drive a pickup truck, which is really the opposite of one of these cars. So for me, I thought to myself, well, I like these cars. I'm driving a pickup truck. I got to focus, work harder, get better at what I do, and then one day I can have one of these sports cars.
All right, Shapiro, we got Prager saying America's pretty good. We got Corolla saying that hard work has value. Can you beat either one of those? Come on.
Easily. Are you ready for this? This is so easy. Okay, men are not women.
Oh, wow.
Okay, well,
You're-
okay.
And the
you
string
asked
has
for
been
it.
cut.
You asked for it. I mean, J.K. Rowling's having her books burned.
Yeah.
Right? The only book any of these people have ever read. Right? They should have read like the Bible or any other book. As it turns out the only people they only read Harry Potter, and now they are burning the only book they have ever read because she had the temerity to say that biological sex exists. Yeah, this is part of a broader kind of rubric that words have meaning, and objective reality exists outside of what you wish existed. That your own personal feelings about things actually do not magically take the form of the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And acknowledging that objective reality exists is a tough one. I mean, and this does go to everything that we're talking about, right? This encompasses the fact that America is not systemically racist. This encompasses the fact that if you fail in a free country, it's probably your own fault. Not always, but very often it is your own fault if you fail in a free country or you made some bad decisions. And it encompasses the fact that your neighbor is probably not a garbage person. I was talking the other day about the fact that in LA, the only thing that anybody seems to care about is planting these stupid ass lawn signs that say all of these dumb tautological slogans that mean nothing like what they actually are supposed to mean.
Right, the future is female and also believe in science.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Black Lives Matter, which again is inarguable in one context, but that's not what they mean by Black Lives Matter. Or water is life, which I was not confused as to why that was controversial. And women's health, women's rights are human rights, and all this kind of stuff. The implication of that entire sign is that the person who lives next to you is a bad person, right? You're a good person, the person who lives next to you is a bad person, and it's sort of like this pagan Passover routine, where instead of like painting the blood on your lintel, you take one of these Black Lives Matter signs and you plunk it in your front lawn, and then the social justice warriors pass over your house and move on to the next house to burn it in the name of social justice. The fact is that in objective reality, your neighbor is probably not a bad person. They're probably just as nice a person as you. They're probably a nicer person than you are because they probably don't think that you're a bad person. And so, objective reality doesn't always meet with your approval.
So one other thing before we jump to the sponsors, do you guys think it's odd that we're thought of as controversial? I find it very odd that so many people...
Oh, you are cracking me up. Do you know, just today, this is weird to hear your thoughts played back to you. Just today I was thinking, I'd like to write a column, every week, that I'd like to write a column. This is what I believe. Why am I called a right-winger? That was what I was thinking the entire column, because I thought, I grew up, it's redundant, as a Jew in New York who went to Columbia. By definition, you're a liberal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's redundant to say you're a liberal.
The entire sentence was actually just
sorry?
redundant.
Yeah.
A Jew in New York went to Columbia. The rest of the
That's
Yeah,
correct.
you
They're
should have
all
done it
redundant.
quadruply redundant
That's
right there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I realize everything that I believed when I was a liberal and a Democrat, I still believe. I know you have this totally.
Yeah, I hear you.
And it's every one of those beliefs is now called right wing. I didn't change. I'm sorry, I didn't. The liberals have accepted the left lie that conservatism is their enemy when leftism is the enemy of liberalism.
Yeah. Corolla, when you were doing the Man Show and comedy and all that stuff, did you ever think of yourself as controversial?
No, I've always just had opinions, and I believe them to be true. And I formed a lot of my opinions because I did a show called Loveline, a syndicated radio show and a TV show, and I spoke every night to screwed up teenagers around the country, and
which is also redundant.
Right, right. Teenagers around the country, but I would. For every night for a decade, I would just hear the problems of 15-year-olds and sort of where they came from. And it was always like, I could tell when the dad wasn't there. I could tell when there was this issue or that issue. At a certain point, you can hear it in their voice. The thing that's kind of interesting is you can physically hear the tone and almost diagnose what their problem is. And so I formed my opinions long ago just hearing all the screwed up teenagers, all the broken families, all the rebellion, and all the ills of society. And I realized, it all just starts at home. And so I just started saying family and education will cure everything with family and education. And then all of a sudden that became hate speech, which is, by the way, I said everything I say now into a microphone all through the 90s and early 2000s, and no one said boo.
Did sixth grade Ben Shapiro, when he was playing the violin, ever think that it was going to cost $600,000 worth of security to speak at Berkeley, the home of free speech?
I'm a frightening character, and I always have been. So, and as everyone who knows me knows, supremely obnoxious. So I actually did think that there was a high likelihood that would happen, just out of pure hatred. But at the same time, it is basically the way you know you're controversial is because the New York Times calls you controversial. What I mean by that is that they only attach that modifier to people who have typically kind of mainstream, middle-of-the-road views, and then everybody else who has crazy left-wing views is just inspiring or interesting or heterodox. But if you're controversial, that's how we know you're right-wing. That's the only modifier they'll ever attach to you. So it's not that I'm right-wing and therefore I'm controversial. It's that they called me controversial, and that's how I know that I'm right-wing. Right? They attached that adjective to me, and that's how I know that I must be conservative, because they've called me controversial. And like everybody else here, I cannot for the life of me understand why any of these propositions that biological men and women are different, that men and women generally have some differences, that America is an extraordinarily good place. And by the way, the best place in 2020 for any ethnically black person to live on planet Earth, by far. It is not close in terms of income, in terms of freedom, in terms of rights, in terms of legal protections. It is really not particularly close. None of these should be controversial statements, but because the media have deemed anything they disagree with controversial, they become controversial. And this is why, and we all know this, right? You know this, Dave, Dennis and Adam, you know this too. When people actually listen to your show, they will come up to you after a show and they'll say, but wait, I thought that you were super controversial, right? I thought that you were super hateful and you were super radical. Like, I didn't hear any of that. So I would go and speak at Berkeley, $600,000 to protect me. I'd say a bunch of stuff that seems fairly basic. And people would come up afterward from the left and be like, I don't understand why it costs $600,000. Like, I don't either, right? It's just because they've decided that if you disagree with the general kind of democratic left view of the world, then you are inherently controversial.
For the record, I did not know that I was a right-winger until the New York Times put my face on the cover. I believe you were on there with me, and you were on there with me. Adam, I don't think you made it, about YouTubers leading people to the alt-right. And then my dad had to call me on a Sunday, son, are you leading the alt-right? I mean, I literally got
and
that
Dave
call.
was like, and I'm gay. Anyway, happy Easter.
Yeah, good luck with that. All right. I want to thank our sponsors, the Young America's Foundation, YAF, YAF, and the good people at the Capital Research Center who are helping us put this whole thing together. By the way, guys, you may be watching this on nosafespaces.com. That's actually the safest space to be watching it, because if you didn't hear about the controversy of the last couple days, the guys who put the film together were trying to put ads on Facebook. And as far as I know, Facebook is a company that perhaps wants to make some money, except they didn't want to take money from these guys. Facebook decided that they did not want to take, I think, roughly around 10 grand in advertising funds, because they did not want people to see this movie. So if you might be watching this on the Facebook page, but we're most likely watching on nosafespaces.com or on the No Safe Spaces YouTube page, which doesn't that kind of prove the point of the film, guys, that big tech maybe isn't our friend? Is that possible? Do you think maybe, Dennis, that big tech is not our friend, is not the friend of PragerU?
You know, I wrote an open letter to, what's the guy's name who came from the Soviet Union who heads Google?
Alexei...
Sergey Brin,
Yeah.
Sergey Brin. I wrote an open letter because I began my public life at 21. It's a very odd life. There's a scene, by the way, in No Safe Spaces of me at 21. Some young guy is acting me out in Moscow. I was sent into the Soviet Union to smuggle in religious items, smuggle out names of Jews who wanted to escape. It was quite something, because I know Russian and Hebrew, so I was the perfect candidate to be sent in. Anyway, so I come home, and it was, when I think about it, I worked very hard to get Soviet Jews out of the Soviet Union. I may be partially or directly responsible for Sergey Brin, his family getting out of the Soviet Union. And the irony of life is he is creating a Soviet Union in the place he escaped to leave the Soviet Union. It shows how profound communism's effect, even on some of those who left it.
Wow.
That he is comfortable with censorship of speech. You have to grow up in the Soviet Union to be comfortable with it. That's what I realized. To screw America after it has saved you is about as low a level as a human can get. That is Sergey Brin and his Google. And it pains me in my heart when I think of the work I put in to get Soviet Jews out of the Soviet Union, and he is one of them. And then he comes here and he owns YouTube, so it's Google and YouTube. Now you're mentioning Facebook, which is another story. Obviously, this has nothing to do with Soviet Union, but here the thing with Zuckerberg is also frightening. The guy actually does care about free speech, but he was intimidated by the New York Times. They started saying, "Oh, his stupid idea that he'll let any speech on," because it's a stupid idea to the left.
Yeah.
Free speech is a stupid idea. That's the level we're at.
All right, well, let's talk to some people who agree with us on some of this stuff, because actually an awful lot of people do. We've got college campuses all over the country that are having live premiere parties right now, and we're gonna send over, where are we right now? Where are we right now? What university are we at right now? Where are we? That's Texas A&M? That's Texas A&M. There's a logo right over there. All right, what's up, guys? There we go. I think we're gonna show one or two more. Where are we over here? We're in Florida. Is that University of Florida?
This is great.
It's Florida.
There we go. Balloons, freedom. You're still allowed to have balloons. You're still allowed to have balloons, guys. Isn't it? It's incredible. Absolutely incredible. Yeah, it's a strange thing that the things that we talk about are thought of as controversial, and that we have to put on an event like this, and then you know, you can't advertise the event, which proves the theory of the documentary in the first place.
The left fully denies that cancel culture even exists. This is one of the great gaslighting.
Right. Yeah, that's the new
It's one of the great
move.
gaslighting efforts I've ever seen. So for folks who don't know the term gaslighting, it comes from a 1940s movie with Ingrid Bergman, and the basic premise of it is that Charles Boyer, who plays her husband, is trying to drive her absolutely up a wall and drive her nuts so that she'll kill herself. And so what he keeps doing is every night he turns down the gaslight, and then he tells her that he has not turned down the gaslight in an attempt to, so that's where the term comes from. The gaslighting here is that the very people who spend their days trying to get all of us deplatformed, right? Trying to get us demonetized on YouTube, and trying to get our material kicked off of Facebook, and trying to go after our advertisers on our programs, and trying to get people, we're in a position, thank God, all of us, where we can speak freely enough because it's our jobs, that we can still make our money and still make our living. The people who are really screwed are the people who are working inside large corporations, who literally have to decide on a day-to-day level whether they wish to feed their children or whether they wish to stand up to the cancel culture inside their companies and, you know, kowtow to the Robin DiAngelo, Ibram X. Kendi, anti-racism, fascism nonsense. And these same people who are pushing this stuff will say the cancel culture literally does not exist. It's just a figment of all of our imaginations. You see, it's just part of the conversation to try and destroy somebody's life based on a normal disagreement.
Well, you know what I always sort of think of? It's like when Twitter, one of the Facebook or whatever, just goes, "Oh, we kicked this guy off of that," and then someone comes back with lawyers and they go, "Oh, it was just an error. It was just an error."
It's always
I
an
always
error.
say it's like you go into a market And every time you get change, you get short change.
Exactly.
Every time, and the
Right.
person's argument is the cash register's broken. And you go,
But it never breaks
but
in the
wait a
other
minute, would I
direction.
get extra change if it was broken?
Yeah.
Like every other time? It's like,
Yeah.
why do I get short change every time?
Exactly.
And you keep saying the cash register is broken, but how's it only broken in one direction? How are these mistakes? How are these administrative problems? Or somebody that, how come it just goes one direction?
Well, I
Yeah.
mean, this actually, I have a question actually.
Yeah, take
and that
it
is,
away.
and that is, how, since there are a lot of college students watching, how should college students deal with this? Because a lot of college students are in a position where if they speak freely, they get graded down, they are socially ostracized. In some cases, they get kicked out of college. We're seeing this increasingly.
I have an answer.
Okay.
And as I did an interview, I sat in your office, by the way, today and did an interview.
Oh, cool. Okay. I hope you enjoyed it.
Speaking of gaslighting, I did fart once. But anyway, so, I don't know
It's
if you're
fine.
going
I've
back
abandoned
early.
that office. I'm
Oh.
leaving
Yeah,
the state,
yeah.
as you know. So.
I hope that's not because of it. Okay. So here I was doing an interview in your office, and here's the answer I gave. And it's an interesting analogy, but I think it's apt. Because these are bullies. People are scared. They're scared for their jobs. They're scared for their social standing. But they also, no one wants to get shouted out of town by the mob, right? When I was doing radio in the mid-90s, it was 96, 97, I said something about Scientology. And I said something disparagingly about
Disparaging, yeah.
about Scientology. And everyone said to me, oh, you're going to get into trouble. You're going to be in big trouble. And they sent a letter out, and they said, you got to apologize, and you got to apologize on air. And then everyone said, do not cross Scientology. They will ruin your life. And I said, I'm not going to apologize. And I got on the air, and I told them to kiss my ass. And nothing happened. They didn't ruin my life.
Tom Cruise didn't show up at your door?
Right.
He came home and Cruz just jumping on his couch.
But everyone said, these guys will destroy you. And it worked. Scientology worked for a long time. I mean, everyone kind of knew the rap on Scientology, but they were effective because the deal was they will ruin your life if you speak up. But now enough people have spoken up, and the boogeyman has gone away. Your life isn't ruined. You can speak freely. And this kind of reminds me of the same kind of period, which is do not speak up. You are going to have your life ruined. But the more people that speak up, the easier it is for other people to speak up. And as it turns out, they don't really ruin your life. They don't have nearly the power you thought they had or that you gave them. Really is what happened, is we gave away too much power to too few who didn't care for us or the country.
Yeah, I'll give my quick answer and then we'll throw to a clip. But, I gave an answer that was an offshoot of something that I heard you say once, Ben, to a college kid. Because every gig that I go to at a university, that's always the first question is I'm afraid to not get the grade. I want to get out of here. I want to be able to go to grad school. I want to get the job, the whole thing. And I used to kind of say something like, well, you could just suck it up for now. That way you can get into the grad school that you want and you hopefully do it. And I said that a few times and it felt thin to me after, when you say something that's not quite right and you just don't feel right after. And then of course I was on tour with Jordan and he was always talking about how you have to say the truth. And I thought, all right, I have to give a better answer here, a more evolved answer. And I started saying to him, you must speak up now. You will never be braver than when you're 18, 19 years old to say what you think. And yeah, is your friend, maybe a friend's going to turn on you, your professor may turn on you, whatever it is. But you don't suddenly, people think, oh, I could just suck it up for now. And then when I get out of school, I'm going to suddenly tell the world what I think. When I have a mortgage and a car payment and a wife and a kid and a dog and everything else. And you never will. Once they've got that boot on you, they will keep you down there forever. It is as simple as that, which is an interesting segue to this clip from No Safe Spaces on victimization.
I would rather my kids have spina bifida than think of themselves as victims. I can't think of anything more debilitating than thinking yourself a victim.
I do an hour on happiness every week on my radio show, and I learned something from listeners that startled me. And that is, I am convinced that a certain percentage of unhappy people are addicted to being unhappy.
Absolutely.
I never knew that. I thought everyone wants to be happy.
Well, think about how empowering it is
Yeah.
to say your problems
are not because of you. You know what I mean? You
Right.
can't get a date, but it has nothing to do with you. The system's against you.
The system is stacked against you and there isn't a bloody thing you can do about it, so why bother trying? Of all the things to tell anyone ever about anything, that's got to be bottom of the list unless you really don't like them.
Here's what our job is as parents, as educators, as politicians, as cops and lifeguards. Our job is to convince younger people they're not victims. Our job is to say to a kid who is confined to a wheelchair, don't worry. You're just going to outwork everybody else. You're going to out-hustle everybody else. And you will see that this thing is not going to hold you back because you have the heart of a tiger. What we're doing now is we're taking able-bodied kids and convincing them they need to use the handicap ramp.
So that's a clip from the No Safe Spaces movie, and of course you can actually get the entire documentary at nosafespaces.com, and it really, it's a wonderful movie. I mean, I know you two created it, so it's a little silly for me to say that in front of you.
I always tell people, I'm in a great movie. It's not a great movie because I'm in it, and I'm not Mr. Humble, I'm Mr. Honest. It is a great movie. And we're delighted to be in it, and obviously I adore this man, and working with him is a total joy. And working with everybody at No Safe Spaces was a joy. You folks have to see it. It's truly, it'll make you laugh, it'll make you cry, but it will affect you and the way you view freedom. I want to, can I go back to your issue about about the speaking out? So here's a great, you guys will all love this. This is a perfect example of what just was said. So I gave a speech up at the San Francisco Bay Area 2 years ago, and I'm in classical music, as you know certainly. Well, you all know. All right. Anyway, I conduct orchestras periodically, and so I'm friends with people in major orchestras. So there's a guy from the San Francisco Symphony, one of the greatest orchestras in the country, says, "Hey, we hear you coming up here. A couple of us from the orchestra would love to have dinner with you." And I'm thinking, I'm still like a kid. Members of a great orchestra want to have dinner with me? I'm so excited. So 6 members of the San Francisco Symphony come to dinner with me, and they're wearing PragerU t-shirts. And I go, do the other members of the orchestra know that? Go, we're completely open. And that's the San Francisco. This is not the Toledo Symphony. This is the San Francisco Symphony. If you're open, you will get flack. As you pointed out, as you did, it will, and then it will pass, and so it is. But to hide your whole life, I'm not judging anyone who does. They may lose their job. That could happen. It does happen. But you can't live a life like that.
Yeah.
And you will find allies. A woman wrote to me, I won't say which orchestra, one of the top orchestras in the country. And
Toledo
she said,
Orchestra?
It's in that area of the country. So yeah, not bad, not bad. What instrument?
Oboe.
Viola.
Oh!
How did you miss? How did you miss? I can't believe it.
Sorry.
Hey. So this woman writes to me, I am in this orchestra 35 years. No one knows I'm conservative. That's very sad.
I want to jump back for a second to something that you said, Dennis, in the clip that we just showed. You talked about happiness, how happiness is actually related to this, that if you choose to live as a victim, you will actually be endlessly miserable. The people who are constantly talking about tolerance and diversity, if these things were true, it seems like you would be happy at the end of it, and yet they're not. And I've found, as I've now hung out with some of you crazy right-wingers, that's what I call you guys behind your back, you guys are actually happy. But I don't just mean you guys. I mean broadly when I go speak at college campuses to conservative and libertarian groups.
If you heard me tell this riddle, it's the only riddle I ever made up. I made this one up. What do you call a happy black?
Well, I listen to your show so
fine.
Religiously, it's easy for me. A Republican.
Correct.
Or a conservative.
No, right, exactly.
Yeah.
Do you know, I just wrote this up, in 30 years of broadcasting, it's a sort of a game I play with in my own mind with listeners. I try to, I think, is this person married? Do they have kids? What religion are they? I try, is there any clue for me, Dennis? That's all. But when a black caller calls up, if he or she is happy, I have batted a 1,000 on this, they are Republican. And by the way, I believe that's true for a gay. I think it is true for a Jew. I think it is true for anyone but a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Christian male. If you are happy, you are overwhelmingly more likely to be a conservative, and then there are no happy leftists. There are happy liberals. There are no happy leftists.
Yeah.
Well, how happy could you be if you thought the Earth, you know, I have, my 14-year-old son is over there.
Does he know how much time he has left?
Yeah, hey, you'll never see your 26th birthday. Now get daddy another cold one. Yeah, how happy would I be?
Yeah.
How can you be happy if the caps are melting and the sea is rising? I mean, you're literally living in, you know, a biblical apocalypse. How could you whistle Dixie, if we can even say that anymore?
Dennis, I want to make a recommendation for your show. So for your entire career, as far as I'm aware, you've had the Happiness Hour going on the show. Right. It's always seemed to me that the difference between the conservative perception of happiness and the leftist perception of happiness is that for conservatives, happiness is a byproduct of purpose. And for leftists, happiness is something that you shoot for, and because if you shoot for happiness, you can really never achieve it. It's really not a goal that you can achieve happiness. It's just a byproduct of other things you do. Maybe you should rename the hour, and it should be the purpose hour. 'Cause that's really what you talk about more than happiness.
Right. Well, the only problem, you're entirely right, but there is a problem because the left has found purpose in leftism.
But they're happy in their unhappiness,
racism fills their lives with purpose, but they're not happy.
I feel like they're happy in their unhappiness, are they not? I mean, like they wallow
well,
in
all
it.
right.
Like
so that goes back to what you and I were talking about.
I used to spend a lot of time with these people. They're miserable, I assure you.
Can I float?
He knows best.
Yeah,
Can I
trust
float
me.
a theory? Because I grew up with these people too, but I was starting to think about, and you're right, purpose, you know, happiness is empty calories and purpose is like, you know, steak and potatoes kind of a metaphor. But I realize there's a reason why these folks may be unhappy, and it is satisfaction oriented. But I realize as a carpenter, in my former life when I was a carpenter, every morning would start with tasks and then completion of tasks. So I'd say, we got to have this garage shear-walled by lunch. And then when we had it shear-walled by lunch, I had a good lunch, you know? And I realized that it was like beginning, middle, end. Start this task, complete this task, have satisfaction and pride, and move on. What if your task was ending racism? Well, that's going to be a treadmill that you're going to run on for your entire adult life. Right. Or it is getting rid of gender inequities or whatever. If everything was, say, a goal and a task was a bridge too far, that everything was so broad that you're going to end systemic, fill in the blank, then your entire existence is a portrait in frustration, right? Because, well, it's Friday and it's time to punch out, but racism still exists, so mission not accomplished. Now enjoy your Friday evening.
And you know, it's a great point. And I think that also, even if you have a task, you know, as big as end racism, normal people have subtasks. Right, like there are kind of milestones that you hit along that road. So you can say, okay, look how far I've gone, right? You can turn around and when it comes to, look, we're never gonna end racism, but if you look at America in 2020 and you look at America in 1820, there's some fairly significant differences. Well, if you see the task of life as moving through these series of achievements, then you can at least look back and say, look how far we've come. But for the left, because they don't have those tasks, because all that lives out there is this miasmatic problem that you're supposed to joust at like it's a windmill from Don Quixote, there's no way to look back and say how much we've improved. And so every leftist essay about race, for example, begins with, here's a terrible thing that happened in 1818. And now just fast forward 200 years to 2020. Right. This is every Ta-Nehisi Coates essay, right? Here is a piece of writing from 1840 about how racist Americans were. Fast forward 180 years, nothing has changed, right? We just skip right over everything that happened, the Civil War, the Civil Rights Movement, all of the changes in American life, the fact that overwhelmingly Americans don't care about race and actually hate racism on a root level. all of it, and you see this in everything. I was noticing this about the wildfires. We're 5 minutes away from the burning of California, which is, I'm leaving, you guys. The biblical plagues are upon us, and I don't know what you're doing here. Honestly, I don't know what you guys are doing here. I'm getting out. You're like the Jews in Egypt who are like, you know what, we're going to stick around and see what happens. We'll see how it goes for you. But in any case, you've got Nancy Pelosi out there being like, this is Mother Nature's revenge.
Yeah.
And Gavin Newsom being like, this is all climate change. It's like, well, if you'd clean up the damn forest, you probably wouldn't have this giant wildfire. But they don't want to do the tasks that are right in front of them, because then they might not get to complain about the giant goal that they have, which is to, quote unquote, end climate change or something like that. And it's the same thing with racism. They don't even want the subtask. It's not just that the goal is wrong, it's they don't even want the subtasks toward achieving that goal.
Well, also think about the misery of you saying you're talking about sort of what you've done, and everything's compared to the past, So it's like, imagine if you said, hey, I got my report card on racism. I got an A and a B plus in inclusion, and they're like, yeah, but your great-grandfather got an F. So that's going to bring the curve down a little. We'll give you a D plus. You know what I mean? Like, how unsatisfying would that be? Which is like, I'm living in the present day. I think I'm getting pretty good grades. And they're like, right, but you have some people that have been dead for 100 years who are in your family who got bad grades. So that's going to reflect upon your report
Well, that's
card.
what I always say, is that progressives of tomorrow are going to hate the progressives of today. I mean, the progressive of 2040 is going to say, oh, that Barack Obama guy ran his first term against gay marriage. Let's burn down his library. And actually, by their own logic, they should go ahead and do it, which is a really odd thing. You can never be far enough for them. But I want to jump back for a second, because when this film was made, this is about, that interview, I think, Dennis, that we did in my studio was about 3 years ago. With you and Jordan, I think it's about 3 years ago. And at that time, everyone kept saying to us, it's just on college campuses, and everyone kept saying, you guys are exaggerating. Right. Now, I guess this is a little bit of a pat on our back. We were kind of right about something, but did you expect, to quote Ben, did you expect the disintegration to happen this quickly? The fact that everything seems to be sort of collapsing at once right now? I'll go to you first.
Oh, did you ask that?
No, you first.
It's not at once. I wrote 10 years ago we're in a civil war, and people said, oh, he's exaggerating. I never exaggerate.
That sounded like an exaggeration, right?
That I never exaggerate.
Yeah, you never exaggerate. That was
it does sound like
that was a mild exaggeration.
That's fair. The truth is, when I started radio, I debated with myself. I could make a point so much more strongly if I exaggerate just a little, and then I realized, yeah, but at a given point, people are going to say Prager exaggerates. So I really try to avoid it. I was not exaggerating. I said, God willing, it will remain nonviolent, and I'm not sure it will now. But we are in what the left has done. I have a motto, and this is truly not an exaggeration. Everything the left touches, it destroys. It's ruined our universities. It's ruined much of Christianity and much of Judaism. It has ruined music. It has ruined art. It has ruined literature. It is ruining sports. I mean, how do you enjoy sports? You were telling me, I think you should tell everybody.
Yeah. I am a huge basketball fan. As you guys know, I grew up watching the NBA. I play basketball. I love basketball. I would rather be in the NBA than doing this, as much as I love you guys. But I have not watched 1 minute of the NBA this season, and I won't. I watch old basketball games. I watch 80s and 90s basketball games on YouTube when I'm doing cardio, and guess what? It's fun, and I know every shot that they hit, and the Jordan shrug and everything else, and it reminds me of something, and I was even thinking, this is what I said to you earlier, I was even thinking that 10 years from now, if this all continues to devolve, kids are going to watch those games from 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and go, whoa, not only did people play basketball games in places called arenas where people came, but white people and black people cheered together. They actually cheered together. Can you believe it? Because if the left wins this thing, we won't be cheering together. And nobody cared. Nobody cared about that. And that's why watching it infect sports is so upsetting, because whatever sport you play, I've never played any sport and anyone cared about the color of anyone's skin. Can you play? Can you swing a bat? Can you shoot a basketball? You're good, and now we're watching it just destroy everything.
Well, I've always thought, and I know Dave says it's more of a moral stand he's taking, but back in the 80s, they wore those tight shorts, and it just showed a man's contours off. It's an aesthetic thing. I don't expect you guys to get it.
Yeah.
Let's be honest here. So the thing that I've always tried to figure out, like, why do people intrinsically love sports? Like, why are we attracted to sports? You know, because it's beyond, oh, I like sports. No, it's like I live and die, and there's something about it. And the thing that's so attractive about sports is it's a meritocracy. It is the last meritocracy. If you're watching and all 11 players on the defensive side of the ball are black, then those are the best players on that team, and it never runs in your mind, or, oh, the guy at free safety, he's the owner's son.
Yeah.
You know, like, it just doesn't exist. And we as human beings are probably meant to be attracted to a pure meritocracy, if you think about it. And so we know, you know, we see corporations, we see the school board, we see this group and that group, and we go, I bet they just let a couple of these people or those people on just to kind of balance things out. But sports was the last bastion of that. And I think that's why we're, as humans, so attracted to it. You know, the heavyweight champ of the world, he's the toughest, baddest man on the planet. That's what we loved about it. And so when these other cultural things and political things start bleeding into our sports, I think the reaction is the last thing that was pure and sort of unstepped on by this society we've created is now having to lose a little bit of purity.
I think, too, we loved it for another reason, and I'm totally with you on that one. I had season tickets to the LA Kings. Hockey is my favorite sport. So I actually had season tickets when they went to the Stanley Cup and won it. It was by sheer good coincidence. And I loved the fact that I would sit next to somebody, of course, a total stranger, who had nothing in common with me. Might have, for all I know, the guy was a member of the Communist Party USA, and I didn't care, and he didn't care. We were Kings fans. It is the place of unity, where you're all cheering together, every color, every race, every religion, everything. You don't give a damn, and the left has ruined it. Sports is now politics, and it's ended one of the great joys of life.
So there are a couple of things that the left obviously is lying about here. So whenever people say on the right that sports has been ruined, and it has. I mean, I'm a huge baseball fan particularly, but also a big basketball fan, and both of my teams this year are actually quite good. The White Sox are great this year, and the Celtics are very good this year. And I have not watched any of it because I'm not going to watch a sport where they've allowed this to bleed onto the field. They always say, well, sports was always political. I mean, go all the way back. Muhammad Ali was political. He wasn't political in the ring, right? He was political out of the ring. Once it starts to infuse your actual viewing experience of the sport, now you have taken what we do for a living and you have placed that into the field of play, and you've allowed outside forces that really divide us to bleed into a place where we at least had a distraction. I mean, literally the word sport comes from the old French de sport, which means to distract. I mean, that was what sports were meant to do. And the great good that sports was that sports were a way to distract you from real tribal affinities and tribal divisions in favor of fake tribal affinities and tribal divisions, right? Like Dennis, you say that you were sitting next to some guy and you had real disagreements with him, but you would never know that. Instead, you as Kings fans were sitting there hating the Blackhawks fans, right? And after the game, you didn't hate the Blackhawks fans because you didn't know them and who cares, right? None of it really matters. The fake tribal affinity was something very good for the country because the underlying message was you can have fake tribal affinity when at the end of the day you're all friends. You can't have fake tribal affinity when serious issues are at stake. And what the left has said is that the issues that are at stake are so large and so powerful that we are not allowed to have fake tribal affinities anymore. You can't sit next to somebody who roots for the same team as you if you guys vote differently in the 2020 election. You shouldn't be allowed to be friends with that person. You shouldn't be allowed to talk about anything that distracts you because the issues at hand are so important and so vital that distraction merely distracts from something like a solution to these big problems that live out there in the universe. And that's devastating. We need water cooler talk in this country. We need to be able to do this. Final point on this. I think that one of the things that's happened is in 2004, I remember after George W. Bush won, and I was living in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It was one of the great nights of my life because I was at Harvard Law, first year there, and John Kerry was the candidate for the Democrats. He was supposed to have his victory party the next stopover, and everybody was prepped for it, and everybody was, I remember in the lead up, because I was in Cambridge, I thought, oh God, this is gonna be such a depressing night. I went and bought a recording of Mozart's Requiem in preparation. And George W. Bush won, and I came in the next day to class, and it was just wonderful. But the the basic concept then was that on the right was that the media had lost. In 2004, I remember this, after Dan Rather brought forth this kind of fake letter about George W. Bush going AWOL, many on the right were like, the media have lost, it's over, right? The media lost. And I thought to myself, I don't think that's quite true. And then in 2008, the media came rushing back in with a vengeance, obviously. And when Trump won in 2016, I think that the left decided that the media was not enough anymore, that the media was not a powerful enough instrument with which to achieve their will. And so they took all of their soft instruments of power, right? Hollywood, sports, education. They took all of the soft instruments of power and they openly militarized them. They decided we're going to weaponize these and go full balls to the wall on this thing. I mean, we are just going to ratchet it up with sports. So when you turn on a sports game, you get a vote for Biden campaign. When you turn on a Hollywood movie, you have a specifically quoted movie with a particular plot line that has to be adhered to, because all of the instruments of culture will be brought to bear to force you to acknowledge that you are politically wrong. So in the moment, it feels like a tsunami, but the backlash is going to be extraordinary. I think that the cure to this is going to be movies like No Safe Spaces. The right is going to start creating culture because they're going to have no other choice. And we're going to end up essentially with two parallel countries in which you have sports leagues where it's okay to stand for the anthem and wave the flag, and sports leagues where you're mandatorily obligated to kneel for the flag.
Yeah, it's odd that you wouldn't want to fork out, $200 or $1,000 if you got a couple kids to go to a game to have a bunch of people making $8 million a year lecture you about things. That's just a bizarre thing. I think we're going to jump over to Texas A&M. We're going to talk to the students at Texas A&M. I think we're going to take a couple questions if we can hear them. Let's see what's going on over in Texas A&M. Possibly. There we go.
Hello?
All right, guys, what's going on?
Doing pretty good. How about y'all?
Great.
Good.
What's on your mind? Who are we talking to? What's her name? Yeah.
Yeah.
You,
Go for
dude.
it. Have
Yeah.
you a question, sir?
You're up.
Any questions? Yeah. So, what do you think, as conservatives, how do we fight the culture war when it's already? I mean, it seems like it's already been lost at this point. I mean, the left has so much domination of our media and our sports. So how do we even try to start that backlash in the culture war when it seems like there's just too much that they have under their control?
Yeah, well, it's a great question because it's sort of an offshoot of what you were just talking about, that it's not just you go to an NBA game and it's Black Lives Matter, but you open up Apple TV and there's a message of social justice. Literally, you go to Uber Eats and they tell you to go to these black-owned businesses.
Lululemon was advertising resist capitalism.
Lululemon,
white
which
yoga
is worth,
pants ladies.
how much are they worth? Something,
like several, what is it, $60 billion?
Yes.
Something crazy.
They sell $150 leggings, and they were talking
For
about
wealthy
resisting,
white women, and they're
resisting capitalism. Yeah, it's
Capitalism
actually
always
incredible.
wins, gang.
But his question is sort of an offshoot of what Ben was saying, which is that once this thing has leaked everywhere, what do we have to do? It's not even right-leaning people. I don't like calling this conservative.
The important thing I want to say to you at Texas A&M, I don't know of a war in history in which the victor was certain of victory at every moment of the war. I don't think such wars exist. It wasn't true for Washington, certainly. Read about Israel in the Six-Day War, surrounded by countries that were dedicated to exterminating it. That's why it's considered sort of a miracle that they won in 6 days. I mean, read about any war. Were the guys who stormed Normandy certain of victory? I mean, in Spielberg's movie, what is it, Private Ryan, Saving Private Ryan, you see the guys understandably peeing in their pants.
Yeah.
No war is won on the basis of we'll win at every moment. You have tens upon tens of millions of people in America who know that the left is a completely destructive force. You are not alone. You may feel alone at any given university. You may feel alone turning on sports, but you're not alone. And the more they make you think that and thereby despair and keep quiet, then they can win. But if you don't think that way and fight back, we will win.
Should we jump to another school? Yeah, we're going to jump over to Cal State, Los Angeles. Here in Los Angeles, Shapiro's leaving you. We're staying.
Suckers.
All right, guys. There we go. You guys got a question for us?
We sure do. One of our questions is like, how do we wake up our peers knowing that if our First Amendment right is taken away, essentially every other right is going to follow that. So how do we, I guess, what would you advise that we can do to wake them up and hey, have dialogue that, you know, essentially canceling or canceling or censoring our speech will essentially hinder us?
Yeah, I love that question because it's like, that's what they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, right? How do you wake up your friends? And that's tough, especially when you're that age and you think your friends are everything you've got. You know, when I get that question, I'm gonna give a little nod to what you do, Dennis, but I tell people, you're in college, you're not going to get somebody to necessarily read a book by Thomas Sowell, and you may not get somebody to, you know, spend hours researching all this stuff, but you could watch a PragerU video on some of this stuff, and there's some good ones that are pretty easily digestible that maybe is going to get the point across. I find, though, that the wake-up sort of has to come on their own. Do you guys find that, too? Like, eventually they will say something that's going to offend one of their friends, and they're going to be like, no, I mean that. That's a real thing that I believe. And then when they watch them turn on them.
I think the reason they want to suppress the ads for this particular moment on Facebook is that the four of us, and thank God it's not only us, but the four of us do affect the way people think, and it drives the left crazy. That's why they don't want us heard. They don't. You students need to know something. The whole country needs to know this. The left doesn't debate. Have you ever noticed that? They don't debate.
Well, they attack you, but they don't
attack,
debate.
but they never debate. I have offered $10,000 to any New York Times columnist to debate me on any subject about America. 10,000, and I'm sure I could raise 20,000. Or to have any black lefty debate Larry Elder or Candace Owens. But they'll never do it. The only tactic they have is to shut us up. So I really do believe that if your friends heard any of us for 25 minutes, it could actually cause them to rethink things. That is how a guy, I got to just quickly tell this. I meet a guy, he's like an Adonis. I mean, it's not often I think a guy is unbelievably handsome. The guy's unbelievably handsome.
Yeah. Well,
well, all right,
good
all
to
right.
see
I'm
you
speaking
too.
for me.
Yeah.
Okay. So at some airport in the country, comes over to me. He's very tall, very good looking. Goes, oh, Dennis Prager, and in some Scandinavian accent. I am from Denmark, or Norway. I am from Norway. I love your videos. I go, you're a Norwegian conservative? And he goes, I don't know if I'm conservative. I just know I have common sense. And I go, yeah, that's all you need.
I like how you made him sound like a Jew from Brooklyn when you did that.
Is that what I did?
Yeah. I don't know.
You know how many Norwegian Jews I grew up with? Okay, so there's a great community.
Yeah. Adam, what do you think? I mean, you got to wake. Your son is right there. What happens the day that one of his friends says, you're a Nazi, you're a bigot, you know?
Yeah, I got to...
no offense.
Yeah, the day is young. So, you know, if you really think about this thing of like, how do we get these people to see things our way, which is sort of what we're saying. Is there any possibility, I'll just ask Ben, that someone who is far left could get you to see things their way when it came to many of the subjects we discuss? Taxes, for instance, just the finances, financial world, or any subject under the sun.
I mean, extraordinarily unlikely, probably.
Right. So what are the chances we're going to convert them? So I think the notion of burning calories, trying to convert them, is probably a waste of calories. My feeling is the first thing you need to do is understand what the truth is and don't be scared to say it out loud. You're going to lose the popularity contest. And I've lived this many times. This is my entire adult life. Me saying, here's how it is. And everyone at the table looking at me going, you're putz, you should shut up. And I go, I'm sorry. That happens to be the way it is. That's the truth as I know it. So that's number one. Number two, you start leading your life, you start telling the truth, and you lead by example. They see you, they see your family, they see your grades, they see how you interact with other students or peers. They see how you conduct yourself, and then essentially, you just are the person they would like to be. And by the way, you're the neighbor they would like to have, because you're the decent person who picks up your dog poop when you're taking them for a walk, even when they crap on the lawn of the person you disagree with.
No, this is exactly right. The classier you are as a person, which is something I've never engaged with, but if I were classy as a person, the better example you can set, the more people are going to want to imitate that. That's 100% true, and I totally agree that the first purpose in any conversation, the first thing you have to do is gauge whether the conversation is worth it, because you only have so many breaths to expend on this planet, and when you're on your deathbed, you're really going to wonder whether that night that you spent arguing with the Karl Marx devotee carrying the Howard Zinn book was really worth it. That's going to be time that you want back. So what I've always said is that you have to determine who you're talking to. Some people are actually open to a conversation, and then great, have the conversation. Some people are really not open to the conversation, and the only reason to have the conversation is to sort of sharpen your skills, if you want to do that, maybe. You make your arguments better, and sometimes that's useful. And sometimes the purpose of the conversation is you're having a conversation with somebody who is hard left because there's an audience for it. And that's kind of what Dennis does on a regular basis, or what I do on a regular basis, where you have to really debate them and bring out your tool set and go to work. But determining what kind of conversation it is really crucial, because you see so many people burning those empty calories, particularly on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter. It just eats your life. It really does. I mean, one of the best things I've done, Dave now takes social media Shabbos. But one of the best things that you can do, honestly, get off social media more hours a day. I took Twitter off my phone. It was killing me. It was ruining my life. The more time I spend on Twitter on a daily basis, the worse my life is. And if your life in real life on college campuses has become a real life Twitter, you need to remove yourself from that and find yourself a place where you can be a little bit calmer. I'm not even talking about protecting yourself from opinions you don't want to hear. I'm just saying everybody needs to calm down for half a second, as opposed to engaging in battles that are completely worthless.
Yeah, and that's directly connected to what we were talking about before, is you used to calm down or at least escape when you watched some sports or you did something for fun, and that seems to be gone. But enough of us talking. Let's find out what's going on down at the University of Florida. Let's find out what's on your mind down there, guys. Tell us a little bit about what it's like to be at college these days. What's going
About Reagan and Washington.
They have a giant Reagan head. What's going on down there, guys? How's university life these days?
Oh, it's going well. Other than
Mickey Mantle.
Luckiest man on the face of the earth.
I think we got a little feedback issue. Let's try that again.
I can't believe the Russians are manipulating this stream.
It's because the TV's on. This
Okay,
kid
we got a bunch of liberal arts majors over
he's
here.
definitely not going to work at Best Buy.
from our university. But other than that, everything's going well.
Hold on, write your question on a peachy folder backwards and then hold it up. Or write it forward, because we got guys who can read the Torah here. You like the inside Jew jokes?
I like it. It was good.
All right, we're going to jump out for just a sec. I taped an interview with Governor Scott Walker, former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker. We taped this yesterday, and he is going to be the new head of YAF starting in January. And we talked just a bit about cancel culture. Let's take a look. Governor Scott Walker, welcome to CancelCon.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Now, first off, you've got an American flag behind you. I'm fairly certain you could be canceled for that these days. So you're really sticking it to the people that don't like the American flag, huh?
That's right. I actually say the pledge, indivisible. I actually talk about one nation under God, not just the pledge, but the whole thing correctly. So yeah, I could be canceled out completely with something like that.
Oh man, you're really going for it. So there's a couple things I want to talk to you about. Starting in 2021, you are going to be the president of YAF, Young Americans for Liberty. But before we get to that, what sort of got you interested in the idea of cancel culture, free speech, this sort of culture war that we're seeing? I know you've been through the battles as governor, but was there like a specific incident that really got you interested in this?
Well, I've seen it over the years. You're right. Much of what we're experiencing in America today across the board. I mean, remember the Occupy movement didn't start on Wall Street. It started on my street in Madison, Wisconsin, where we had over 100,000 people occupy our state capitol for months on end. But we saw it on our college campuses. I saw it personally, where I would try to come and speak at events, not just on campuses, but elsewhere, where people would shut us down and try to stop things. I looked at the time at amazingly, some surprising campus. Certainly what was happening at Purdue under Mitch Daniels, but even the University of Chicago, Princeton, some other places that had some pretty eye-opening policies. You know, everybody proclaims that they're for free speech, but unless you put some teeth behind it, and we really pushed the University of Wisconsin and our regents to do just that years ago, well ahead of all this.
Yeah. What kind of leverage do you think the governors and the states have with the state universities? Because we've watched virtually every university, public and private, just be decimated when it comes to defending free speech. Even University of Chicago that you just referenced, they were one of the best on this. And in the last couple of days, they've issued some statements that they're backtracking on some of this stuff. What are the levers that a governor can pull in a state for the state colleges?
Well, the power of the purse in this instance, even though public institutions don't rely solely on state aid, and in fact, over the past couple of decades, have gotten less of it, the fact is they still can't live without a substantial investment for not only the 4-year, but for the 2-year campuses and all the other programs that are part of that. They can't they can't survive, if you will, without relying on the state government to be a part of that. And so what governors can do, what state lawmakers can do, is say, hey, you've got to have true free speech, and not just free speech policies. You got to enforce it. If someone violates that, there's got to be some teeth to it. I think as strong as saying, you get one warning and after that you're expelled if you don't abide by the free speech. My right to speak out shouldn't be stopped by somebody else coming on stage and preventing me from speaking. Vice versa. If I don't like a liberal, I can protest. I just can't stop them from speaking.
Yeah. Where do you think this started at the university level? There's this constant debate whether it was the students that brought it in, whether it was the professors, whether it was the administrators, whether it was the donors. Do you have a sense of where it got in originally?
Well, I think it's all the above. And I remember Bill Bennett years ago, Secretary Bennett, decades ago, literally, warned that the left was going to take control of education, higher education, culture, and media. And sure enough, that's exactly what they've done. And they don't just push their own ideas. That would be bad enough, but they cancel out everything else. And that's where I make the argument as governor and now in this new role with Young Americans for Freedom, I make the argument that going forward, even liberals should be advocating for the same things we are, which is free speech. Free speech should be guaranteed anywhere in this country, but most of all, it should be embraced on our college campuses. Sadly, it's not. And the argument I make to some of and I have a few, but not many liberal friends, you think about from a classic liberal standpoint, the argument should be, hey, ideas should be open and free, and particularly in a college experience, you should have exposure to all different ideas so that you can defend those ideas in the future. That's not happening. If it can happen to one side now, there's no reason why the tables couldn't be turned in the future.
So you mentioned my buzz phrase, classical liberalism. Yeah. Do you think that there's a reason that the liberals failed related to free speech, that the ACLU, that used to be a free speech organization and was adamantly liberal, has now become a leftist organization that's in many regards against free speech? Do you see that as like a fundamental difference between conservatism and what has happened to liberalism?
Yeah, and you see this trend in history, whether it was the old Soviet Union, it's now in Venezuela, elsewhere. It's not just a difference of opinion. When one side, those of us on the right believe in the power of the individual, the power of the people in the true sense of not the government, but giving that power back to each and every individual. At the other side, argument is they believe in the government. Ultimately, if you believe in the government, you take it to its natural extreme, it becomes all about power, not about giving power to the people, but about amassing that power. That's certainly what you see in places like Venezuela today. And so when it's all about power, then you can't have any opposition. You can't have any pushback. You can't have any alternative ideas. And you don't debate them on the facts. Under that scenario, you completely shut them out of the marketplace of ideas entirely. And that's exactly what's happened. They've just given up on the debate, I think. and said it's all about power. And whether it's a college campus, whether it's in social media, or whether it's in the mass media, in every one of those instances, they don't just do it through the obvious ways, the heavy-handed fist that you saw in many communist parts of the world. They do it by trying to deem anyone who opposes them as somehow being an ism, racism, fascism, radicalism, without any regard for what the facts are.
Yeah. So when you were governor and you were at times fighting the mob, like when they took over, the Capitol building and all that, how did you and your team and everybody decide to say, okay, we have to respect people's right to protest, but at the same time, you have to do it legally and lawfully and make sure that you can't just have endless amounts of people constantly taking over whatever buildings they want to for whatever cause that they have, whether it's just or not?
Well, it's exactly right. We learned a lot. We went and helped other states, like Michigan went through a smaller scale that a few years later. We walked them through how to do that, how you keep the law, but how you don't allow them to take things over, because no one ever expected that they do this, nor did they expect that 14 Senate Democrats would leave the state. In fact, one of my favorite bumper stickers after this was all said and done was "One walker beats 14 runners." But we just stayed the course. And the best thing is we went out and talked to the people. I remember a good example, and this is where the national media gets caught up in this too. We would do a press conference every day. And one day when we had something like 100,000 protesters in and around our Capitol, I think it was the NBC reporter said to me, "Well, Governor, don't you hear all those people out there? Don't they have a right to be heard?" And to your point, I said, absolutely. In America, that's the beauty of being in this country. You can protest your government. You can speak out as long as it's done safely and reasonably, but you can speak out. But I said, but with that in mind, while they have every right to speak out, I was elected by more than 1 million people across the state, most of whom are working in their hometowns right now. And I'm not going to let the voices of a few drown out the many who are asking me to do the things I said I'd do when I'd run.
Do you sense that right-leaning people then, because of what you just laid out about the levers of power and everything else, whether you're a conservative or a libertarian or an old school liberal, whatever it is, that we're all sort of at a disadvantage in this battle because we don't want to use the state to accomplish things? So the other side in this regard, that's their goal. I mean, it's the stated goal. We want to use the state to get the things done that we want to get done. People on the right, they generally shy away from that. So there's an asymmetry in this battle, which is why right now, so many people on the right are the ones talking about free speech, although in the past, that's not always how it's been.
Right. Yeah. When I grew up, and even before that, I went to school in the 80s. I think about those in the 60s and the 70s, many of whom are the professors who are stopping free speech right now. But they were the ones taking on the establishment. They are the establishment right now. But you're right. Those of us on the right, because we believe in the individual, because we think that true freedom and prosperity don't come from the clumsy hand of the government. They come from empowering people to live their own lives and pursue their own dreams through the dignity that's born of hard work. A lot of people who are, back in their homes working aren't every day figuring out new ways to get the government and government-funded programs to drive their agenda. That's all the more reason, like discussions we're having right now, to inform, to educate, and to motivate people to get out and say, hey, you can get involved. You don't have to do this 24/7. You don't have to do this for a job. In fact, America was built by people who were citizen lawmakers, by people who stood up and said, servant leadership, I got to do something. And then, even our great first president, George Washington, went back home to Valley Forge. He could have been king. He could have been president for life, but he understood, not just for his own sake, but for the future of this great country, he had to establish the standard of passing it on to the next person. We need to do that. We need to motivate people to get up, to do their part, to engage, and then train others, which is exactly what I'm looking to do at YAF, train the next generation of freedom fighters to stand up and do exactly the same thing.
All right. So even though you are not the president of YAF yet, you still got a couple months. I'm going to ask you the number one question that I get from college students when I speak on college campuses, and I've gotten this question at events that were in partnership with YAF. So let's see if you give an answer that's close to mine, and we can unpack it from there. So the number one question I get is young people will say to me, I'm in a class right now, and I know that if I voice my opinion, and often it's not a political class, it might be a class about dance theory. I mean, it could be having nothing to do with politics, but they'll say, I know if I voice my opinion, that might be more libertarian or conservative, right-leaning, whatever it is, my grades are going to suffer. And when I started getting that question, say 4 years ago, my answer used to be, well, you know what, just suck it up and wait till you get out because you don't want it to affect grad school and your job and everything else. And I've completely flipped on that now.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what your take is, because you're going to be leading this organization and so many of the people that are part of it, this is their number one thing, being able to speak freely on college campuses. What would your advice be?
I would agree. I would preface it though by saying, before you speak out, raise your hand and ask your professor, your instructor, whoever it might be, if they believe in free speech. Get them on the record saying what they say about that. And then after they say, which overwhelmingly they're going to say, of course I do. Of course, it's a basic tenet of higher education. Well, then say, well, then I should have a right to share my opinion. It doesn't guarantee that it'll be corrected, but at least it will put it in context, as opposed to, I think a lot of these folks are so blinded. We see it certainly in the presidential election, but we see it just in the discussion of the ideas. They're so blinded by their views and the belief that anyone who disagrees with them isn't just wrong, but is evil and unjust and awful. I've said for years, the left is driven by anger. We need to be driven not by anger towards our opposition, but rather by this positive belief in the American people and sharing that. We talked about Reagan being the happy warrior. We need to be happy warriors. But I would start by asking that instructor, that professor, if they believe in free speech. Then at least you got something to fall back on.
Do you think the universities can be turned around?
I do. I don't think it's going to happen overnight. And I also think it's a combination of things. I think not only do we need, which is what YAF does, is go out and helps with chapters and speakers and lawsuits to try and push free speech so that even if it isn't happening at first blow, at least we can come in and force it. Even UW Berkeley, we want a big deal there over free speech. So we can win in the courts if we have to. But I'd like to give support not only to our students, which is foremost. I'd like to find ways to provide support for professors, for educators, and even teachers in kindergarten through 12th grade, particularly in our high schools. Because I think there are more that aren't necessarily conservative, but I think there are more who at least acknowledge that the current system isn't fair. And if we can give them more support, let them know that they're not alone, that there is support for people who want to teach objectively. I don't need conservatives. I mean, I'd love to have them. I need in higher ed and even in high school and junior high, I just need objective education. If people teach basic American history, world history, economics, and financial literacy, the world would change overnight. At least this country would change overnight over the next few years if our students were exposed to the truth, which I believe is on our side.
Well, you've got your work cut out for you, but I suspect that you're probably up to the challenge. Former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker and future YAF President Scott Walker, thanks for joining us on CancelCon.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.
Isn't it spooky that we're having this discussion?
Yes. But we have to have it.
I understand. It's just kind of spooky that that it's even a thing that you're even thinking about, that we have to be modulated. And I'm a little worried about it, a little alarmed about things I cannot say. I do it anyway because the thing I've always loved about this is it's people, money, and me. There's no middleman in this. Essentially, I'm running the show at that moment. But it is weird that I'm thinking a little bit.
We as comedians, the whole point of what we're doing on stage with our words is to make a point about the absurdities of life. Like, I have a joke about, being comfortable with my size. I say it depends on where I am geographically. And if I'm in New York, I'm pleasantly plump. If I'm in LA, I'm a beach whale. I say if I'm in the Midwest, I'm anorexic, and it's awesome.
Right.
And then I've had someone come up to me after a show and be like, I was bulimic in high school. And I'm like, okay, calm down. That wasn't about you, first of all. It was a joke. And that's what I'm up here to do.
All right, and we've got Kareth Foster live. Kareth, how are you? Oh no, can't hear you. Think you might be on mute.
What do you mean?
Oh, there we go.
Okay, there you go. It takes a second. I think there's a little delay. Thank you for having me.
Kareth, you definitely, wherever you are geographically right now, have gone the anorexic route.
Oh, you're very kind.
Can you talk a little bit about what's going on in the comedy scene? Dennis was just asking Adam what it's like to be out there right now. I mean, we've got COVID and then we've got political correctness. I don't know which one is worse.
Well, right now, obviously, there's not a lot happening on the comedy scene in clubs since everybody has been shut down thanks to COVID. There are some outside things happening, a lot of virtual shows, which is interesting because you still get the feedback live time just in the chat, like, oh, that was okay, or, you should rethink that. I had a similar incident happen. I spoke at a school last week, a very prestigious school. I'm not going to name names. And the dichotomy of, it was fascinating. I had an American student tell me that one of the jokes that I had, kind of piggybacking on the weight joke about a fat cat, was offensive and I should rethink it. And I had a Pakistani student reach out to me not long after and say, thank you for using your humor. Thank you for your commitment to free speech, because I don't have that in my country. And it blew my mind how, here in America, we have no idea how good we have it, and we are throwing it away.
What do you make of the state of stand-up in general? I mean, I know some pretty well-known, famous HBO comedy special comics who actually privately are kind of afraid to get back into the game after this thing.
I'm not surprised. Listen, comics like to be liked. They have an ego thing going on. And I think people are afraid of losing followers, of losing fans if they let their true opinion shine, which is so sad because that's the antithesis of comedy. You guys were speaking earlier about, speaking into your truth and this personal responsibility that we all need to embrace and bring to the table. And comics should absolutely, that's what the greats did. Richard Pryor, George Carlin, Lenny Bruce. These guys were out there putting their souls on the line. And it's a shame that comics today are feeling like they shouldn't or can't do that because of the reactions and the backlash they're afraid they'll receive.
Yeah, Adam, I feel I should let you jump in and offer a little comedy something.
I have a COVID joke, Gareth. Because I'm going to Arizona tomorrow. I'm doing 4 shows. I've been to Texas a few times. I've been to Tennessee and done a few shows. So anyway, here's a COVID joke for you, but it really only works for me because people know I don't like my parents, right? So I say, I have an elderly mother, and I go, the good news for me is I don't have to visit. She lives in North Hollywood. I don't have to visit my elderly mother. And I'm this close to convincing her the virus can be spread over the phone.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
And then everyone says to me, wait a minute, why would you say out loud you don't like your parents on a show that's openly on the internet? And I go, because my parents would never watch a show I was on. I can say whatever I want.
Kareth, what's the closest you ever got to being canceled? Have you had the joy of being canceled yet?
I actually was at Oberlin. I was brought in by the Young Libertarian and Republican Club to present a program on humor and the importance of humor and why we need to keep it and embrace it and have it in all of our lives. There were 17 people in the club. 300 people showed up to shout me down. Now the good news is, because I'm, charming, I was able to kind of quell the audience, and I literally said to them, you guys are spending a lot of money to come to this institution, and the fact that you are going to miss an opportunity to really get higher education, to be exposed to new ideas, to broaden your horizons, isn't that the point of why everybody's here? Why would you do that to yourselves? And don't you all also believe that everybody has a right to have their voice heard? And I didn't get a boo, a hiss, a nothing. And in fact, people came up after the show, thanked me for coming. Some people even wanted to join the group because they didn't even know what the group was about. They just heard their friends say, oh, well, we can't let these people have this person commit. And they've had speakers before who'd been, shouted down and couldn't even speak. So, I felt like it was a huge victory on my part, and a huge victory for free speech. And if we can have more sessions like that, where we talk to people, we reach, not just try to reach their minds, but their hearts, and get them to understand, as the student said, that once free speech goes, you know, it's going to be a domino effect with other things. It's free speech doesn't mean you have to agree with what somebody else says. It just means you have to listen.
Yeah, I remember doing stand-up one night, and I used to do a joke, believe it or not. I think I told you this once on your radio show, Adam. I used to do a joke that involved the N-word, and it wasn't to be racially offensive or in a pejorative way. I was doing an impression to make fun of people that use words like that. And for about 5 years, it would get a huge laugh. And then I remember one night I was on stage at Gotham Comedy Club in New York City, and the crowd they all froze like all at the same time. And I remember in my head thinking, I'm never going to tell that joke again. And that's a pretty dangerous place for a comedian to be.
It's a dangerous place for anybody to be. Even The Guardian, which is on the left, said, this is ridiculous. We can't discuss a Huckleberry Finn.
Yeah.
Because you can't say words that are in there. I asked on my show, why can you say kike? Kike is the N-word about Jews. And by the way, you should be allowed to say it, but not, obviously not to call a Jew that, but to say what the word is. This is all, look at how holy I am. It has nothing to do with real morality. I wanted to say something. I don't know if you guys know this. This is one of the great, I didn't even report this, I don't think, on my show for some reason. This is an actual headline, I think it was in Fox News, wherein a company, I think a hair salon, put out an ad. We would like someone, you know, who knows hair, knows how to, and is happy because it's important to our customers. And they were attacked for discriminating against the unhappy.
It's gone so wild. I mean, you saw this case from USC where a professor has now been suspended because he was trying to explain how people use various filler words in various languages. You saw this story, Dennis?
Yep.
I mean, and he was explaining that the word in Chinese, that's the filler word, so for us it's right? But in Chinese, there's a word that sounds like the N-word. This guy, who clearly was not saying the N-word, was booted from his job for not saying the N-word because he was speaking Chinese. That's how insane things have become. But I think this is I actually am optimistic about this part of the culture because the left is so humorless and so obnoxious that it's unbelievably boring, like crazily boring, to the point where you see mainstream comedians who are certainly not on the right, who have started to decry comic cancel culture. You started to see it from people like Aziz Ansari. You're seeing it from Dave Chappelle. These are people who are certainly not on the political right, and they're starting to get annoyed with it. And they should be annoyed with it because the left, I have a theory, and that it's that the left was always humorless, but I think Trump absolutely killed comedy. I think Trump's election was the stake through the heart of comedy in America because the entire late night, which had decided they weren't going to make jokes ever again about Barack Obama, right? Obama really kind of killed comedy because you couldn't make a joke about God. That's not allowed, right? Religious believers actually make jokes about God all the time, but if you're a religious believer in Barack Obama, you cannot make a joke about Barack Obama under any circumstances. And so people would say, like, he's not funny. Are you kidding? He was super funny. But Donald Trump is legit hilarious, right? He's hilarious from every possible angle. He is himself a funny person. His speeches are a long comedy routine. And then he's also unintentionally hilarious, right? Like, from every angle, he's the funniest president we have ever had. I mean, it is not even close. And in a stand-up comedian battle, he would bury these people, right? I mean, that's just not close. And so they have lost the humor. They've lost all capacity to even do humor, to the point where you watch Seth Meyers and it is indistinguishable from watching Chris Cuomo or Don Lemon on CNN. And that's a real soft spot for these folks. I think that, like, when the best that you have to offer is Hannah Gadsby doing anti-comedy, I think you're pretty much toast.
Anti-comedy. Kareth, to use a little bit of cancel culture and identity politics against themselves, you happen to be black, you happen to be female. Do you think that has helped you as you said what you think is on your mind, or is it hurting you as you say what's on your mind?
You know, listen, to quote my really dear friend Irshad Manji, she wrote the book Don't Label Me. I think it's insane that we think that people, just because of their color or their sexuality or their political preference, are monoliths. You know, we are multifaceted, multi-layered individuals. And it appalls me, and it does hurt my feelings a little bit that I have to, like, I love Dennis. When Dennis and I first met, I go, listen, you know, I'm not really a political person. I'm common sense. Like, that's what he goes, oh, you're conservative, girl. Just own it. You're conservative. Like, oh, I'm common sense. And I think that, you know, right now in this day and age, the fact that we have this need to pigeonhole people and put people into a category just based on our own needs for comfort, which is really what it is, right? Let's not, play games around this. It's a disservice to ourselves. We're missing out on opportunities for relationships, experiences, and opportunities just to grow and to engage with one another and to not be stuck in this trap of a humorless world.
Do you ever censor yourself on stage? I thought it was interesting that in that clip we showed right before, Tim Allen talks about censoring himself, and this is a guy who's got more money than God. He can do whatever he wants. He did have a sitcom that I think was a top 10 sitcom canceled because he's right-leaning. I mean, the network basically admitted it, and then I think did his show move to another?
Yeah.
It came back on another network.
Yeah, my friend runs that show, and yeah,
I was just gonna say, there is a time I did sense, like I thought about it, because I had a joke about not sounding black enough, and it was, why? Because I enunciate, because I finish my sentences, because I happen to know who my father is. And my mother hated that joke, and my dad thought it was hysterical. My parents have been married 53 years, and I think it's like, for anybody to look at that and be like, assume that, all black people don't know who their fathers are, like that, screw you. Like, how dare you make that assumption? I know there are certain statistics out there, but that doesn't speak to everybody's experience. I also have a joke about being a Huxtable. That's how people could relate to me. And I say, well, I can't use that joke anymore because people think my dad tried to roofie my Girl Scout troop. So that won't work. But I try to make this joke, and you still see people kind of cringe a little bit sometimes. So I try not to censor myself. I really try to be me. I am not a comic who uses the N-word because I don't know if you've noticed how I sound. I grew up in the suburbs, and apparently you're not supposed to say the ER. So it doesn't sound right coming out of my mouth. And it's just not who I am anyway. That's just not my style. But I do think that it is important, again, this being true to yourself and not letting other people take that away from you. Like, that is what freedom is.
Well, if you think about comedy, and so here's why there's these are competing sort of notions, being politically correct and left-leaning in comedy, because comedy is really mostly about stereotypes. Like, if you're making a joke about gay people or Jewish people, then you have to do stereotypes. And I was explaining to my son, here goes a politically incorrect joke. I was explaining to my son,
Thank you for the trigger warning.
Here's how stereotypes in humor works. And if you do stereotypes that don't work, then like you go, when you're running late and you always get behind on the freeway, you get behind one of those German guys driving a Porsche, and it's like, that doesn't make sense to me. But you go old lady or old Asian lady or whatever it is, and then all of a sudden we're back with the stereotypes. But if you can't do stereotypes, then there goes a lot of the jokes. And I said to my son, here's how comedy and stereotypes work. I think you'll learn after this I'm the world's worst dad. I said, son, what if I told you were going to compete in a spelling contest with an Indian kid? You'd go, oh crap, I'm going to get slaughtered. What if I told you that kid was American Indian? And
I get it.
right. And he laughed because he understood the stereotype of the Indian kid, obviously, who nails the spelling bee. Dennis, where's the laughter? Come on.
I
That was
did
a
laugh.
stereotype.
I did. I thought it was
That was a
good, yes.
stereotype joke.
No. Yeah. No. Yes.
Yeah, okay. So, Kareth, we want to thank you for taking the time to join us. So thank you to Kareth Foster. And we actually just got a question on the online chat room. The question basically is that there seems to be sort of an asymmetry in the way we fight this, that the left is constantly always fighting, always taking everybody out, and that if we're picking sides, our side kind of doesn't do it. When is the last time a bunch of people tried to take out a left-wing comic? It's sort of not imaginable. Actually, when they've tried to take out Ellen or left-wing comics, it's the lefties that do it. What do you guys make of that asymmetry there?
I think you become a hypocrite if you try to take out or cancel other people you disagree with, I get the part where you have to sort of fight fire with fire, and I don't apologize for that reason. But to say, I don't agree with cancel culture, but when are we going to start canceling them, feels hypocritical to me.
So we ran before, my business partner and I ran Daily Wire. We ran an organization called Truth Revolt, which was a subset of the David Horowitz Freedom Center. And we specifically set up the Fight Fire with Fire Center. It was supposed to be the anti-media matters, the whole goal of the thing. And we made this explicit, as you say, we don't like these tactics. We think cancel tactics are bad. And we will stop doing these cancel tactics against folks that Media Matters likes as soon as Media Matters stops using these cancel tactics against folks on the right. Because the basic idea was going to be that there is this tremendous asymmetry where every time Tucker says something, Media Matters goes after his advertisers. If Dennis says something, people go after his advertisers. If I say something, people go after my advertisers. And advertisers believe that there is only pressure on one side, and so they've got to believe that there's pressure on both sides, or the left has to stop with this stuff. So I totally get the mutually assured destruction of it. And I think that there is something to the idea that you arm up with nuclear weapons to dissuade the other side from using nuclear weapons. You can't just kind of wait around hoping that the better angels of their nature kick in, because there are no better angels, unfortunately, of Media Matters nature. It just doesn't exist. With that said, I think that we have to be very careful about how we choose to use that. And so I've spent a lot of time defending people on the left who I strongly disagree with from being canceled. I mean, people who hate my guts and who'd never defend me in a million years. I've defended people ranging from Sarah Jeong at the New York Times, who I think is awful, to James Gunn, the director of the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise, when they tried to cancel him for bad old tweets. And I think it's important that the right does that because, again, there is the idea of modeling a behavior that you think people are going to resonate to. At the same time, if it's going to reach the point where the entire right wing in media infrastructure is threatened with complete destruction because all the advertisers are going to be removed from them, my business partner and I have discussed this. I mean, if we have to go nuclear on the entire advertising industry because they're going to destroy everybody on the right, then we'll just make it unpalatable for them to advertise with anybody, period. And then we'll see how everybody likes this particular game, because either everybody's going to play the game or nobody's going to play the game in the end.
Yeah, Dennis, what do you make of the asymmetry? We really haven't talked about big tech too much, and obviously that's a huge part of this, and PragerU has had all sorts of problems with YouTube. I've had all sorts of problems with YouTube. I know Daily Wire has also all sorts of problems with YouTube. That's an asymmetry that is, it's one thing to say left versus right asymmetry. It's another thing to say guy trying to say what he thinks on YouTube versus YouTube asymmetry. Now we got that's not even asymmetry, that's something else altogether.
This whole show has been about the asymmetry. If fair rules applied, they would lose, and they know it. Why do they need to cancel us? We don't need to cancel them. As I said before, we would debate any of them. They don't debate us. I met Thomas Friedman, New York Times columnist since 1436. And I met him on that famous shuttle at Dulles Airport about 5 years ago. He didn't know who I was, which is, by the way, par for the course. They don't hear us, watch us, read us. We watch them, read them, and hear them. So I said, I'm just curious, I have a radio show, a national radio show. I wonder if you'd ever want to come on. And he goes, oh, thank you, but I don't do radio. By sheer chance, I heard him on NPR the next week. He doesn't do radio that might differ with him.
Yeah.
And I don't blame him. Thomas Friedman is as superficial as you are handsome. How was that?
That was good. That was good. That was good. We needed more of that. That was pretty good.
Fine. So, I mean, they don't want. Did you ever hear the press conference, so to speak, of Joe Biden? So tell us how terrible the president is. Yeah. Why do you think the president would be a disaster? Those are the questions. And the questions at Trump are, why are you evil? So the asymmetry is total. And every young person watching this, you have to know the reason it is because they would lose if the rules were fair. That's the key point that everyone needs to understand. Nevertheless, we obviously have to fight. And I'll say one more thing. It's sort of my pitch when I ask people, and this is not asking people for PragerU. Thank God we're doing fine. I mean, you could always help, but that's not why I'm saying this. I tell people there are three types of good people. Those who fight, those who help the fighters, and those who do nothing. Those who do nothing is the largest group. Helping fighters is just as important as the fighters. You can't fight without supplies. So the people who help the fighters, and it's probably fair to say we're all fighters up here. So if you support our sponsors, if you support our foundations, whatever it might be, You are just as important as anything that we might do. Not everybody is cut out to be a fighter, but everyone is cut out not to do nothing. You can't do nothing. America is at stake.
So with that in mind, when we took a little break, when we showed some of the clips, we actually all kept talking about this stuff because this is what we do. And we sort of whittled the conversation down to what I think was sort of about hope at the end. You know, we're here in LA, we're here in California. Can we turn this stuff around? So we don't have to make this about California specifically, but everything we've talked about here, are you guys actually hopeful that we can win this thing, so to speak? Ben?
I mean, the nice thing about being a pessimist is that you're always right eventually. So in California, no, I'm out, man. I mean, good luck. You guys get to stay here. The battle's with you. Godspeed.
Yeah.
I'm going to take our tax dollars and starve the beast. We're going to go someplace where they don't waste our tax dollars on complete random nonsense that is antithetical to everything I value and believe in. And we'll take our 75 employees in the state and we'll leave. As far as the future of the country, I'm hopeful for a couple possible things. One is that there will be a backlash to this. I think that the left has so overstepped its boundaries. They've become so censorious, so nasty, so unlivable that people will backlash to it. I think that one of the problems right now is that because everything is channeled into the forum of a presidential election, and because President Trump is who President Trump is, he may not be the best vehicle for the backlash. Meaning you have to fight to get, for a lot of people, the backlash may not manifest as a vote for Trump. It may manifest as something else. Right? It may manifest as speaking out in their job, or it may manifest as getting involved in a private school as opposed to a public school or a charter school or something.
Or homeschool.
Or homeschooling, which is the big thing, right? I mean, they're literally, this is the greatest moment for homeschooling in the history of the world. I mean, bar none. But I'm hopeful that there will be a backlash on the one hand. I'm also hopeful that the right is going to, at a certain point, consolidate and realize the battle we're in. This is part of what we do, all of us, I think, is fighting the left. But part of it is trying to wake up the right to what the battle actually constitutes. And this is a really hard part of the battle. Because for a lot of people on the right, they think that what the battle really amounts to is if I sign a check to my church and I give a little money here and I give a little money there, that's good enough. The left has militarized every component of the culture. And what that means is that we're going to have to start thinking, unfortunately, like the left does, in terms of how they use their market share. And so I think it's actually morally incumbent at this point to turn off the NBA. I think it's morally incumbent at this point not to watch the NFL. I think it is morally incumbent to take a look at how you're spending your money with corporations that actively seek the destruction of your value system. I'm not talking about people who just advertise on the other side. I don't care about that. Everybody should be able to advertise. I'm talking about corporations that are actively promoting the idea that America is evil and putting out public statements suggesting that America is evil. You should not spend your dollars with them. And I think that as people awaken to the fact that the walls are closing in, they're going to start flexing their muscles in a way they simply have not, because we're still operating on the right in a universe where there is a water cooler, and now the water cooler has been completely poisoned. And so when we wake up to that, I think that there is a lot of muscle that has not yet been flexed. And when that happens, I think that there could be something interesting that happens.
That's a little hope for a pessimist. What do you think? Are you hopeful?
Well, it's funny. We keep saying, when are we going to come together? And my thought on this is always, I think we're going to have two places. We're going to have safe spaces, and we're going to have octagons. That's where we're all heading. I mean, if you look, just culturally, the UFC is the fastest growing sport. What does that have to do with? I wrote a book 10 years ago called 50 Years We'll All Be Chicks.
It's the funniest book ever written.
Oh, really?
It's so funny.
Sonny,
it's
wake
fantastic.
up. Ben Shapiro says funniest book ever written.
It's so funny, dude.
Thank you. So he's staring at his phone. But the point is we're going this direction, and then there's another group that is doing Tough Mudders and dunking themselves in ice buckets, jumping into freezing swimming pools and running ultra marathons and stuff. So what it is it's pushing another group further side. I was doing an interview at Daily Wire today, and one of the things I said is, you drive around LA, I've never seen more Jeeps with lifts on their suspension and knobby tires than I have in the last 10 minutes driving around LA, meaning for every fifth person that gets pushed into a Prius, the sixth guy goes, I'm getting a Jeep. And not only am I getting a Jeep, I'm putting a lift kit on it, I'm putting a winch on the front, a roll bar, and a rack of lights. I'm going, there's no reason to drive a Jeep in LA, but for every 5 people that are signaling to everybody, hey, I'm Leonardo DiCaprio, I'm driving a Prius, come on now, look over here. There's going to be a 6th that goes, I'm getting a Jeep, I'm putting a lift kit on it, and I will send my signal to you. And that's where we're going. So I think you're going to find a group, and in a way, Ben was sort of speaking about this vis-a-vis Los Angeles and California in general, which is, okay, one group is going to go, screw it, have everything you want or think you want, but you really don't. Abolish the police, have all the homeless people you want, just do whatever you want, hand out drugs, do whatever, hand out food, hand out money, and then we will go over to this octagon over here known as Texas or Tennessee or Florida or wherever that is. And I think everyone who's moving toward the octagon sort of realizes the fate of the people that are moving into the safe spaces. It hasn't happened yet, but we all understand that the octagon is the truth. Safe spaces is a lie. It's a lie like the deficit. You can kick it down the road a while. Eventually, people aren't going to be able to hammer their Social Security checks anymore, and that's when it becomes a truth. So I think a small but large, in the sense that large in numbers but small proportionately, are going to go harder toward what we know is real. And at some point, the people in the safe spaces and the people in California are going to find out what the truth is.
And by the way, the people in the octagon are usually the ones who are producing most of the stuff, because they're working hard and making things happen and thinking of new ideas
and producing families.
And producing families and happiness. So Dennis, are you? I know you care about happiness, but are you optimistic about all of this?
No.
Okay. Good night, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
I want to amplify on it because I never fake an answer. Okay, I assume it's a final statement, as it were?
We're getting there.
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
Final statement. Bring us home here,
okay.
Dennis Prager.
So let me just say for me, I'm not optimistic and I'm not pessimistic, and the only time I ever think of whether I'm an optimist is when I'm asked the question, which I'm asked all the time, totally understandably. To which my first answer is, what difference does it make? I always have the analogy of the guys who stormed Normandy Beach. Were they optimists? What does it mean? So do you think the Germans will miss you? As you're the first landing on Omaha Beach, you think, are you optimistic that you won't get shot? I don't know if they'd say, I hope so, but I mean, realistically, a lot of us are going to get killed. There are two problems with optimism and pessimism. They both stop you from fighting. If you're an optimist, why bother fighting? Things will work out. If you're a pessimist, why bother fighting? Things aren't going to work out.
It's a bad question, Dave.
So I'm opposed.
They handed me this question. That wasn't one of mine.
It was a great question because it allowed me to give this wonderful answer. So I'm very happy you asked it. It is irrelevant if I'm a pessimist or you're a pessimist or an optimist. Okay, civilizations are fragile. I, as a Jew, know this, and why my fellow Jews don't understand this drives me out of my mind. The most advanced society in Europe went from Beethoven to Auschwitz. Now, I know half of American kids never heard of Auschwitz. I mean college kids, according to the latest survey. It was a Nazi death camp. And so the country that produced Beethoven and Goethe and Schiller and Bach also produced the death camps. There's no guarantee of any society staying wonderful. You have to fight every generation to keep a society decent and free. The left is destroying the decency and the freedom of this country. Period, end of issue. I am devoting my life to fighting against them. The guys who died at Normandy Beach died for America and freedom. The least I could do is live for America and freedom. That was the vow I took at Normandy 25 years ago, and that's the one you all have to take. It is worth fighting for. It's irrelevant if you're optimistic or pessimistic. This is what you have to do.
I don't think I can add anything to that. That's how you end a live stream right there. However, I will send you guys, if you're not watching on the nosafespaces.com website, you can check that out, and you can buy the documentary right now. Oh, wait a minute. We are going to do more.
So Michael Knowles and Ted Cruz.
We're out of here, but we are going to do one more thing for you. Michael Knowles interviewed Senator Ted Cruz at the Daily Wire a day or two ago. We're going to throw to that, and thank you guys for watching.
Hey everybody, I'm Michael Knowles here on the set of Verdict with Ted Cruz, and what a coincidence, I'm joined by Senator Ted Cruz. We're here to celebrate Constitution Day, and actually to get into the Constitution, I'd like to read a passage from the Declaration of Independence, not the Constitution, but has a great connection to it. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Senator Cruz, it seems to me that there is a relationship here between the Declaration and the Constitution. And there's a relationship between self-government and the ability to say things, to reason together, to speak about our country and what holds us all together. How's that all work together?
Well, look, I think that's exactly right. And if you want to address why free speech is important, why the First Amendment is important, that passage from the Declaration does a fabulous job of explaining why. And we can think about it from a couple of levels. One is a question of legitimacy of government power, and the other is a question of sovereignty. For most of recorded history, people had understood sovereignty as coming from the top down, from a monarch, from a king or queen, and who was endowed by God with authority, and the people under that monarch or that emperor or that dictator had to obey because sovereignty came from the sovereign. The Declaration and later the Constitution inverted that entire scheme and began with the proposition that sovereignty begins with "we the people," the opening words of the Constitution, "we the people," and that the legitimacy of government power, look, if it's the sovereign, if it's the king who has all authority, then whatever he, or if it's the queen, she does to dictate their rules, you don't have any ability to argue. You don't have any ability to dispute. You don't have any say in it.
Yeah.
For the Constitution, if we the people are sovereign, then having a robust protection of free speech is how we ensure legitimacy of the government, because all of us are the sovereigns, not whoever happens to be in the White House, not whoever is in elected positions. Jefferson, who authored the Declaration as well, he referred to the Constitution as chains to bind the mischief of government. But for those chains to work, you've got to be able to call out the government when it's wrong. Free speech is all about denouncing whatever dumbass policies the people in office are saying. That is where consent of the governed comes, is the ability to challenge it. If you want to change our country, how do you do it? Do you decree? And if you look at the left and cancel culture right now, when they have an outcome they want to decree obedience. You must be silenced. And if you do not agree, if you do not submit, if you do not bend your knee, you will be canceled, you will be fired, you will be expunged from society. That is the language of totalitarianism. It is the language of dictatorship. It is the language where power emanates. Whoever has the iron fist rules.
Yeah.
Free speech is all about we the people have the right to criticize our government, which means we have the right to express our views, whether we're right or wrong.
And I think sometimes you'll hear a story, and more than sometimes, you hear it all the time, about a conservative, say, on a college campus, who tries to say his views and he's shouted down, or he's ostracized, or maybe he's kicked out of the class or something like that. And we say, oh, well, it's just one instance. He's not allowed to say this, or you're no longer allowed to say some word or some idea to express. But that is actually a threat to our constitutional system. It totally undermines our constitutional system, because in a self-governing republic such as ours, how do you govern? The way you govern is with words. You argue over, I mean, I think you know this better than anybody in the world's greatest deliberative body. You debate things. You persuade your fellow senators. You persuade your constituents. We persuade our fellow citizens. And then hopefully we can then make some laws to govern as we would like to be governed. When you take away speech, when you take away our understanding of free speech in America, all that goes away.
Well, that's exactly right. And there's another component that is at play here, which is fear. And fear on two different axes. Number one, fear from the hard left. If you're a socialist, if you're a Marxist, if you are Antifa or BLM or someone else that is decreeing an outcome, the fact that you want to silence anyone who disagrees, or by the way, if you are Putin or Xi in Russia or China and you want to silence a dissident who's speaking against you, all of that is the product of fear, that you're afraid if they could speak that someone might disagree, that someone might not be persuaded by what you're saying. And so censorship is the act of the coward. Censorship is the act of someone who doesn't believe in the power of their ideas. I'm a big believer in John Stuart Mill's principle, which he explains so beautifully in On Liberty, that the best cure for bad speech is more speech. And so fear on one level, the left is afraid. If you're defending socialism, the last thing you want to do is listen to the benefits and blessings of free enterprise. Far better to silence anyone who dares disagree. If you're advocating for abolishing the police, the last thing you want to do is listen to actual facts about how police officers keep minority communities safer, keep low-income communities safer, how police officers defend and save Black lives, and that abolishing the police results in many more dying. You're afraid because you're afraid of truth, you're afraid of sunlight. But there's another axis of fear, which is the fear that the totalitarians, the ideological totalitarians, impose on the people. You know, a couple of months ago, I was out with Heidi and Heidi's family in California. As you know, Heidi's a native Californian. And we were visiting with a family friend who is a kindergarten teacher. And she told me, she said, she's afraid right now in the classroom. She said there's a McCarthyist air about that if she says the wrong thing, and she doesn't even know what the wrong thing is, but if she says the wrong thing on any topic, she's at real risk of being fired, of losing her job as a kindergarten teacher. When you have people engaged in censoring and canceling and using brute power, you will comply with the Borg or you will be silenced and crushed. It results in fear among ordinary citizens who don't even know how to comply. And look, democracy is all about the government rulers being afraid of the people, not the people being afraid of the people in government.
That's right. It reminds me, I did a speaking event one time with our friend Andrew Clavin, and we were just discussing politics, culture, and a group of students came in, obviously very left-wing students, and they came in with duct tape over their mouths. They had tried to get the event canceled, unfortunately, or I suppose fortunately for us, unfortunately for them, they didn't succeed at getting the event canceled. So they came in as if they said, we can't speak. Your speaking, you as conservatives speaking, is silencing us as leftists. And so I had the microphone there and I said, okay, well, I'm not sure exactly what kind of stunt you're all pulling, but it seems you think that you don't have a voice. And so here's my microphone. You're more than welcome to take the tape off of your mouths and come debate these ideas. Spoiler, I think you could probably imagine, they didn't do that. They didn't want to do that. The left doesn't want to debate these ideas because they know they don't have very good arguments. If they did, as you say, they would come, we would debate these subjects, they would persuade more people than we would persuade, and it would be over. So instead, what do? They say that the speech from conservatives is dangerous, or I suppose as a consequence of that, they say that conservatives need to shut up, and you see censorship not just at the university level, but now apparently all the way down to elementary school and certainly on the big technology platforms. and in corporate America and in everywhere in between. And that's not just a minor threat. That's not just a minor inconvenience because you want to spout off on some political opinion. That is fundamentally cutting at the heart of our Constitution, which has served us well for a very long time, but it is always imperiled because, as Ronald Reagan said, freedom is not passed in the bloodstream. You have to teach it, you have to preserve it, or it will disappear by the generations.
Well, it strikes me those students had placed tape the wrong place, that really where the tape was over their ears, because they were unwilling to listen. And it was over their eyes because they were unwilling to see. Listen, you and I are not afraid of Marxists. We're not afraid of socialists. We're not afraid of lefties. We both went to college campuses where we were surrounded by lefties. And you know, my dad jokes that I learned to speak liberal. But it's valuable hearing contrary arguments and to test what you believe and to be pressed on it. And it's interesting that the example you said of those guys showed up and you offered them the microphone. Years ago, when Barack Obama was president, I was part of a protest out on the White House grounds. And we were protesting the Iran nuclear deal, which was catastrophically foolish and stupid. And I was out with a microphone laying out all of the harms to America of giving the Ayatollah Khamenei billions of dollars. And Code Pink, you know, the leftist group, they were there and they were protesting. They were screaming and yelling, and they just wanted to shout us down. And so I had a microphone and I did the same thing. I said, all right, I'll tell you what. If you disagree with me on this, come up here and you tell me why the Iran nuclear deal is a good idea, and I'll give you this microphone. So I'm an elected member of the U.S. Senate, and now I said, now listen, you got to pick one of your guys, pick whoever you want, and you got to come up and actually engage in a conversation. You can't just scream and yell. And they actually picked a woman named Medea Benjamin, who's one of the original founders of Code Pink, and she came up, and the two of us had basically an impromptu debate on the Iran nuclear deal for probably, 15, 20 minutes. And if you Google it, it's still out there on the internet, but she actually engaged in the discussion. And it was interesting. Her group that was yelling and screaming, they actually quieted down and listened to the discussion. And that, I know I'm not claiming that I necessarily persuaded them. In a democracy, if you're interested in truth, if you're interested in getting to the right outcome, having the contrast of ideas is a powerful way to test what is right and what's full of crap.
That's right. That's right. And that is the only way that we will be able to maintain this republic of ours. Thanks for tuning in to CancelCon 2020. Be sure to download No Safe Spaces, which is available across streaming platforms today. Happy Constitution Day to everybody, and long may she reign.
This new politically correct tyranny, it's creating an atmosphere of fear and repression. It's gonna bust. There's no shortage of people who are waiting to dance in the streets while everything burns around them.
I went to the police station and I said, here's what I think I experienced, but I must be imagining it.
Kevin Hart has stepped down from hosting this year's Oscars.
Isn't it spooky that we're having this discussion?
The type of diversity that they hate is diversity of thought.
Did we need $600,000 of security to hear all of that?
How long before they come for your job and for my job?
This is why we're fighting for the soul of America.
When's the movie coming out again?